A lot of people are talking about Wuthering Heights, but how bad can it be? Welcome back, everyone. We're here to talk about the newest adaptation of Wuthering Heights in a long line of adaptations of Wuthering Heights when it comes to films. This is the one from 2026. It was directed by Emerald Fennell. It stars Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. Margot Robbie is Catherine Earnshaw. Jacob Elordi is Heathcliff. He's like Madonna. He's just got one name. He's Heathcliff. And if you don't know this about me, I am a big fan of the book. If you're not familiar with the story, it's a sort of gothic romance. It's very tragic. It was written by Emily Bronte. And at the time when it was released, a lot of people dismissed it and thought it was kind of terrible because it goes against a little bit of the writings of the time, where a lot of books focused more on these morally upstanding characters. And in Wuthering Heights, people often say it's about beautiful people doing terrible things to each other, which I must agree with. It's a generational story about how trauma affects us over time. It's about revenge. It's about obsession and love, losing yourself in someone, finding yourself in someone, societal pressures, classism, and the divides that they create. And so that's what the book is about. But what is this movie about? Also, in case you want proof, here is my copy of the book. This is actually my really nice copy of the book. I have a few different copies. This was gifted to me. This is the Folio Society copy, and I love it. It's so pretty. Not sponsored by Folio Society, by the way, but they make great books. So when I saw the trailer for it, I thought, yeah, this looks like we're not going to be getting into everything in the book. And needless to say, when I was listening to, some of the promotional campaigns in the lead up to its release, Emerald Fennell literally talked about the idea of how Wuthering Heights has quotations around it, because she feels that it is a book that is kind of impossible to adapt fully, and that when you're coming to a book like this, you're going to come to it with your own mindset, your own approach, and it's not going to speak to everything. And as someone that has watched the movie, I agree. It does not speak to everything. It's basically the first half of the book. The book is split into two different volumes. Volume 1 is more about Kathy and Heathcliff and their relationship. Or Catherine. I'll call her Catherine for this point, for simplicity. The second volume is about Kathy, who is Catherine's daughter. A lot of people have the same names, I know. It's about Kathy and her journey as she grows up. Her mom is gone now. It's just her and her dad. And Heathcliff, how he gets involved in her life. He's grown up as well. He's older. And he's like messing with stuff because he wants revenge. So these two volumes are kind of separate stories that are interwoven and connected based on the family histories, which interweave and connect a lot. There's a lot of cousins, if you know what I mean. A lot of people have been saying that this movie doesn't understand the book and miss the point. And as someone who loves the book, I have to say I don't entirely agree with that. I do think the film has its own lenses that it's putting on this story and its own things it's extrapolating from them. But there are emotional beats in the film and in terms of the themes, I think, that fit with the story. It doesn't get into all the themes, and it doesn't go quite as deep as the book does, but it does touch upon some of the core ones. It deals with obsession, love, this idea of identity and choice, and do you fully accept someone, or do you not accept them because there are those flaws that you can't really change about them? There's a lot of that the book gets into that I'm also, upon this recent read through, my mind has been opened even more to some of these concepts. And I think it hits the nail on the head pretty well for that. I think there is some classism in there. I think it's a little classism light, but it's in there. And overall, it is very raunchy. It's really raunchy. In comparison to the book, if you watch this movie and you're expecting there to be all these scenes with everybody getting it on, I am so sorry to disappoint you. None of that is in the book. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It is implied. There are references and allusions to it. So, considering that Wuthering Heights was published in 1847, yeah, there's not that much of that. It wasn't really a thing that people wrote about at the time. So what I think Emerald Fennell has done is she's added a bit more spice to this for a modern audience. But that stuff that is still implied in the books, she's just imagined what it would look like if you made Jacob Elordi and Margot Robbie make out on screen for about half of the film, it feels like. The fact that it zeroes in on the romance between Catherine and Heathcliff, I don't think is wrong. I think that is a huge part of this book and a huge part of the appeal for people that like the book. I do also love the second volume and everything we get into with the generational trauma, but I don't think that you necessarily need to have that to have an appeal to audiences. And I think focusing on the romance between Catherine and Heathcliff, there's still a lot there that you can take from it. And how because they couldn't accept each other for who they are, I think ultimately they could never really be together. I think that's kind of what the film is about and what it talks about, and this idea of how romance can move us to do crazy and irresponsible things. It can literally make you mad. And that's mainly what the film is focused on. And it is a tragic romance. I love it. I love tragic romances personally. I love when things end terribly. And this is one of those stories that does. Now, they do make a ton of changes from the book. Isabella is basically a different character in this, in my opinion. The way that she responds to Heathcliff, taking her as his wife, and how he treats her, his treatment of her is totally different than the books. They made it kind of like a fun, kinky thing for her, I think, like kind of more of a sexual awakening. And they deal a lot more in the film with the idea of female oppression as well in this time period, which is also something that's in the book too. But I think the film really focuses more on that here. I think we also see a huge change in Catherine's father, Mr. Earnshaw. Mr. Earnshaw here is kind of a combination of Catherine's older brother, Hindley, who is not in this movie. And that's unfortunate because there was a good time when Heathcliff first comes into the family in the book where he's nurtured and all of the kids are kind of getting along, and Nellie and Hindley and Catherine and Heathcliff are kind of all having a fun time together. And then Mr. Earnshaw starts to favor Heathcliff over Hindley. And so when he dies, when Mr. Earnshaw dies and Hindley inherits Wuthering Heights, he kind of uses his position to make Heathcliff's life miserable because they have this rift from when they were children and they grew up together. And that changes everyone in the house, really. And Hindley also becomes this terrible person because his wife passes away. And so the elements of that you see in Catherine's father in the film are elements that are taken from Hindley's personality and combined with her dad. Her dad did have some things that were kind of not great, but overall I would say he's a pretty nice figure in the book. I think the strongest part of the film is the visuals and the music. I think visually this film is insanely amazing to look at. And even though it cost $80 million, which is still a lot of money, I'm actually surprised that it only cost $80 million because it truly is a visual feast. And I was excited for Emerald Fennell directing this, even though I was apprehensive when I saw the trailer and thought, this looks like it's going in a different direction, because I had heard that she is really good at the visual storytelling element. And I've heard A Promising Young Woman is great and I should watch it. And I've heard Saltburn is great and I need to watch it. And with this movie, I was like, okay, well now she's adapting one of my favorite works. So this I need to see, right? And in terms of if you need to see this movie, I don't know. I don't know if you necessarily need to see it, but I think if you're going to see it, it is a nice one to see on the screen because those visuals are very compelling. And I think there's a lot of beautiful visual storytelling in this film. There's a lot of color motifs. There's a lot of symbolism in the oddities of the design choices. Kathy being in a bedroom, in her room when she goes to live with her husband, Edgar. Edgar creates this room for Catherine when he brings her into his household. And her bedroom, because obviously they have separate bedrooms because, it's 1847. And her bedroom is the color of her skin. In fact, the walls are all made to resemble her skin because Edgar thinks her skin is so beautiful, which is very romantic and very strange and very weird. But it also ends up being a symbol for the idea of the prison of her body, this idea of her being desired as a beautiful woman and how that can make someone feel. It's almost like the walls of her room become, in the end, a bit of a prison. But she also has this affair with Heathcliff after he comes back into her life. And a lot of that happens in her bedroom as well, in the middle of the night, him sneaking through the window. And so there's also this idea of, the sins of the flesh. So there's some imagery here that I think is really cool. And with Isabella and her obsession with ribbons, and then it almost feels later when Heathcliff elopes with Isabella, when he's taking the ribbons off of her, there's this idea of like unwrapping her like she's a gift. There's a lot of really disturbing and yet beautiful imagery in regards to the idea of the feminine or what it means to be a woman, things like that I just found to be somewhat intoxicating. And while this film does feel a little long, I think it's a little overlong. Like we could cut about maybe 15 to 20 minutes just because some of the shots are so indulgent. They just go on too long. Visually, they're beautiful, so I don't hate it, but I could feel the passage of time. I never checked my watch, but I felt the passage of time. And it's not like we're doing a generational story, because where this ends, it ends with Catherine's death. And in fact, Catherine never even has her daughter, Kathy, who exists in volume 2. I do think that they approached the whole pregnancy element a little bit better, because we actually get a scene where Catherine reveals to Edgar that, she's pregnant, and that's a whole element that comes up throughout the film. I thought they did Nellie really well in this. I loved her relationship with Catherine, and almost it felt a little bit romantic even at times, and that was a cool angle. I never thought about that when I was reading the book, but I think that is an interesting interpretation. This idea that maybe Nellie's in love with Catherine. And so when Heathcliff comes into the house, it's almost like he steals Catherine away from Nellie. So all of that I thought was very interesting. And I think ultimately there's a lot of interesting elements to this film, but it doesn't quite stand up to the text. The book is better, but the film has some interesting takes, despite the fact that it ends at volume 1 and we don't even get Kathy to be born. And so there is no generational trauma to be explored here because we've effectively cut that limb off from the book. So it's missing things, but for what it's aiming to do, I think it did a pretty good job. And so that's why I say it's less of an adaptation, more of an inspiration. But I do find people calling it, just exaggerated fan fiction is it's a little much for me, because there is stuff that is taken verbatim from the book. And I think they adapted some of it quite well. Also, the costumes are beautiful. I just needed to say that. That's all I have to say about this book, this movie. Well, definitely this movie. If you guys want to hear my thoughts on the book, I did just re-listen to it. So I would love to get into Wuthering Heights and why I love it. A lot of people say that it's like the worst of the Bronte sisters, what they produced. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights is like the worst one. And I disagree with that. It is my favorite. So I would love to get into that a little bit more with you, which is also why I find it odd with a lot of the reviews, a lot of people coming out being like, it's not an accurate adaptation. I love the book. And I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I didn't know a lot of people that love this book. And now all of the sudden, they all seem to have appeared. Although granted, it's not a great adaptation, so fair point, honestly. That's all I really have for this one. So yeah, if you want that book review, let me know. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, friends, stay nerdy. Bye! And if you love when I talk about movies and review them, check out this.